In this segment, I'm covering what happens when we have problems with the production of custom orders to provide a bit more transparency and background about the custom order process. We've been making custom wigs for a very, very, very long time. And out of all of the ways that wigs or hair pieces can be made, custom orders for any company are always the more problematic thing to produce, because when you look at all the specifications that can go into an order, that exact piece may not be made again ever by a particular factory, or may not be made again in a certain time frame. So for example, there may be a very specific wig that we make in 2012 and we don't make it again until a year later. As a result, it's very difficult for a factory to get a certain level of fluency and efficiency with making something when it's a one-off. It's just like in your own life, if you have to tackle a complicated task, it can be very difficult and take a lot of time to get it right. But if you never have to do it again, or you don't have to do it again for a very long time, you don't get that repetition to become more efficient at it and to improve upon processes. This is one of the reasons that custom orders can be particularly challenging to make. Part of the other thing that factors into custom wig manufacturing is this. One of the things that's known in manufacturing of products outside of wigs, we're not going to talk about wigs for a second, we're going to talk about making things overseas or even in a factory type setting or in an assembly line type setting. One of the things that's known is that in a circumstance where you are producing an item, you often get more efficiency if one person handles the production from beginning to end. So say for example, we're talking about making a pair of pants. When a pair of pants is sewn in a factory, they'll either run the process one of two ways. They'll have one person that only does one step. Maybe all they do is put on the left pocket onto the left pant leg, and then the other person puts the right pocket onto the right pant leg, and the other person sews the waistband to the back, and then another person sews it to the front. That's kind of how it works. Now, one of the things we know from manufacturing is that that is considered to be an efficient process because people just off the top of their heads think that's the more efficient way to do it. You don't have to train one person to do everything. You get this one person, they have their piece and they do that piece repetitively and they get good at it. However, one of the things that we know from manufacturing outside of the wig industry is that when one person does something from beginning to end, it actually ends up working better, because if anything goes wrong in that process, they can catch it and correct it. One person only doing one thing doesn't have the scope to see an issue with the overall piece. I have a point with this and I'm getting there. So when it comes to producing a wig, there's one person that prepares the hair, and then there's one person that colors the hair. There's another person that hand ties it. If a piece has a silk top, then two people are hand tying it. One person is hand tying the silk top, the other person is hand tying the remainder of the wig, and then it's getting stitched together at the end. That's one way of making a silk top, and that's the most common way a silk top is made. There's another way of making a silk top where one person makes the whole piece, but it's less common because it takes a particularly skilled person to do it. One person makes the cap, and then when it's all said and done, if it needs to be curly or wavy and it's not virgin hair, someone else handles the texture. If any one of those things goes wrong, then that piece is not right for that custom order. One of the issues that we deal with is that a lot of times people think that it's taking a very long time to make a specific wig, and that's almost never the case. What's normally the case is that one of those processes didn't go right. Sometimes it's caught during production. Sometimes it's not caught until after it's made. Sometimes it's not caught until after it's made and after we get it and we catch it and we had to start the process all over. There are some things that can be fixed, and if it can be fixed, then we'll send it back and try to fix those things. And there are some things that can't be fixed and we just have to start all over. And that is part of the reason that production of something can go beyond the time frame that we give on our website. Let me give you an example. Earlier this spring, we started really having a problem with blondes, and our blondes have been coming back with too much red in them. We call this a strawberry blonde. Strawberry blonde is a term that a person who has blonde hair or wears blonde hair understands that phrase. Very, very, very few blondes like strawberry blonde, okay? Most blondes like a neutral, gold, or an ash. One of the difficulties with dealing with that on a production level is that the person who colors the hair, they're not a colorist, they're not a hairstylist. They've probably never seen a box of L'Oreal, Clairol, Matrix, Redken color in their life, and they don't necessarily understand the concept of a strawberry blonde. And when you're saying like this blonde has red in it, their perception of the color and of what you mean when you say this blonde has red in it doesn't always resonate, because it's like, what do you mean it has red in it? It's blonde, it's yellow. And there are tones to colors that are difficult to communicate with someone who's working in a production capacity. What ended up happening, many of our blondes, almost all of them, came back with too much red in them. Sometimes we can tone it after the fact, here in the United States using hair color, tone it and cancel out the red, and sometimes it just doesn't work because the coloring process used in the factory is a fiber dye, and it's very, very different than the coloring that's used in a salon that's hair color. So you can't always tone factory color with hair color. It doesn't always work. Like, you can get some really unexpected results when doing that, and we've been through all of that before. So what that ended up doing was creating a backlog with our blondes, and in some cases we were able to get those explain the problem to customers, because if someone wants blonde and they don't want strawberry blonde, they really don't want strawberry blonde. And we were able to explain the problem to some of our customers and get them into other colors. And with some of the other ones, we still have to work that out. But that's a problem that comes up. And it's not difficult to see how something like that can happen, but in terms of the grand scheme of the kind of problems that you expect to come up when producing things, it just wasn't something that at that particular time we were expecting to have to deal with. Even though after it happened, it's like, yeah, I can kind of understand how that would happen. All of these things factor into producing custom orders. And again, there are many different variables that can go wrong. Like, for example, there was a time a few years ago when our factory changed the lace and did not say a word. So we have all these units and they're being produced and they have this lace, and then all of a sudden we get this batch of units with a completely different lace, and it's like, uh-oh, what the heck is this? We don't like this lace. What is this? When did you change? Why did you change? Why didn't you say anything? And it was something that if we had known that change was going to happen, we would have made the choice to switch to a completely different lace that we preferred. But, these things happen, and they happen so much, and it's very, very difficult manufacturing to not have these issues for the simple fact that we're not making hundreds of the exact same thing. See, when you're making hundreds of the exact same thing, or even maybe like 50 pieces of the same thing, what ends up happening is you get a production sample. You get what you consider your most perfect unit, and then you copy it a bunch of times. When you're only making one of something or one of something infrequently, you don't necessarily get the chance to have that perfect production unit, because that perfect production unit, it stays with the factory. So it's not like you make a perfect piece and then you sell that to someone, and then the next time you want to make it, they remember, because it doesn't really work like that. They don't remember that piece. So that's part of the complication of producing custom units, I think, as we go on as a company, because we get so hammered when it comes to customers and how they feel about the production time when it goes along. It comes to a point where we start to look at, well, maybe we have to start stepping away from the custom order side, and we've definitely begun really taking a step back and just not taking on some things, not taking on some color blends and some other things, and really trying to keep our custom orders within something that we feel we have a reasonable likelihood of getting it right the first time. Having said that, there are always outliers when there are things that go wrong that you didn't expect to go wrong. I feel like as a company, we run a lot of interference, in trying to catch these issues before that piece gets to that customer, but then it comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of maybe not having the exact information on where we are in the process or what has happened, because there are all these moving pieces and we're trying to get things fixed and we're trying to get things done, and then we don't have any specifics, and so that leads to a customer feeling like they're not getting any information, and it kind of really snowballs from there. But we definitely try to do our best, and one of the things that we definitely stay on top of is making sure that we have the right quality and that people get the level of quality that they're expecting to get. And that definitely comes at a cost across the board. And that is a circumstance within which we can run into issues with the custom order production. So I hope that provides some transparency over the process. The other thing is that sometimes I've been told, well, should we change our production timeline? And that's a really tough one, because when things go wrong with someone's order, sometimes they go all the way wrong. And even if we added more weeks to the timeline, it still wouldn't have made a difference. We still would have been late. Sometimes things go wrong and we can fix them and still hit our timeline. It is a very difficult thing to say definitively. We should tell people that it's this, because it's always like it just depends. And when you're online, is there any way to say specifically up front that this is going to take longer? It's like, no, because there's a certain amount of time it takes to make a wig, period. And the only thing that really makes it take longer is if the amount of hair, because it adds to the amount of labor, or if there are miscommunications or things of that nature. Outside of that, the time it takes to make something is pretty reliable. But if there's a problem, the time that it takes to fix that problem is very unpredictable. And so from our perspective, we are definitely learning to kind of, decline some things, because when we get into experimental pieces or designs or things like that, we can run into more problems. And we definitely try, it doesn't always go well, to communicate more proactively with customers, and we definitely could do a better job of that. We just don't necessarily know how. We try, and we definitely could do a better job with that. But there's never any ill intent when it comes to the custom order process, and there's never any complete lack of care or concern or not paying attention to what's going on with someone's orders. It's just that managing them is it is something else. And we definitely do the best that we can to, at the end of the day, deliver people what they wanted. And there's always these circumstances where it's a little heartbreaking, because someone will cancel their order and then 2 days later, 3 days later, their piece shows up and it's perfect. Like all the fixing and all the communication, and we got it so perfect. But they canceled that order and they're mad and they don't want to hear anything about it. And it's like, oh man, it's such a shame, because it's like, wow, this is a gorgeous unit. And if we could have made it work, we could have, but we can't rush the process. We don't rush the process, because that leads to hastiness and shortcuts on the production side. So I hope that provides a little bit more context. So as you're trying to figure out what you should do, you can understand what could happen, or if it has already happened and your unit is already late, you can understand why. Thanks for listening, or thanks for watching if you're watching the video.